Hello everyone. In this presentation, I'll be discussing about pedestrians and automation. The article I'm basing my presentation on is written by Adam Millard Ball, who is an associate professor of urban planning at the UCLA Luskin School of Affairs. His research and teaching are about transportation, the environment, and urban data science. In this particular presentation, I'll be discussing about his pedestrians, autonomous vehicles, and cities article. So usually when a conversation is stricken up about automation, our minds usually just consider the ramifications of the automated vehicles or how much longer it will take to convert to a society where driverless cars are dominant over regular cars. But it's also crucial to consider how the dynamic between pedestrians and vehicles will evolve in terms of behavior. Millard says the broader contribution of this article is to highlight the changes and strategic incentives that would accompany the widespread adoption of autonomous vehicles. So, the current pedestrian and car relationship in place consists of pedestrians knowing that drivers typically do not want to injure them. So then the question is, why not cross the road with assurance? Well, there is a possibility that the driver is inattentive, intoxicated, or the car might just be going too fast for it to stop in time. Therefore, the pedestrian's instinct is to stand back. Now, the potential changes that will come with this, with automated vehicles taking over, is basically that with the revolution of automated vehicles, its own priority, the safety of pedestrians, is what drives the change. If autonomous vehicles were to become the norm, pedestrians can potentially take advantage of the added guarantee of safety that comes with the change. If the pedestrian were to come in front of the car or make any unpredictable sort of movement, it would just stop. In short, pedestrians and cyclists could actively exploit the predictable and safe behavior of autonomous vehicles. So, in the article, Millard uses the crosswalk chicken game to analyze this situation with game theory. There are two premises that the article takes into consideration with game theory, one being driver versus driver, and the other one being driver versus pedestrian. In driver versus driver, there are two cars going full speed and are about to crash unless at least one of them moves out of the way. In table 1, you can see that driver 1 wins by 100 points if they don't swerve, and driver 2 loses, and vice versa. They both lose if they both swerve. Now you might be wondering, how do they lose if they swerve? Isn't surviving supposed to be a win? Well, yes, but in this crosswalk chicken game, the premise is that whichever one succumbs is the one to lose. This will make more sense with the second scenario, where it's pedestrian versus car. The only situation where the pedestrian wins is where they walk and the driver yields. Otherwise, even when they both proceed, you can see that the pedestrian loses 100,000 points, and that's because getting crashed into as a pedestrian is much more costly than being the one driving. So, using game theory, we can theoretically infer that if it were autonomous vehicles instead of human drivers, the whole don't yield row will just vanish. In other words, it would not exist because it will always yield for the pedestrian. That's the purpose of this game. Millard is trying to show that it is not simply changing the probability and numbers of the game currently in place, but the rules as well. So he proposes three different policy scenarios: pedestrian supremacy, regulatory response, and human drivers. So this plan is basically allowing the pedestrians to take advantage, as was mentioned previously. It creates urban environments where pedestrians and bicycles dominate. Pedestrian activity will slow down autonomous vehicles, especially on non-arterial streets, which as a result makes walking a quicker alternative for more trips. Because it's difficult for autonomous vehicles to penetrate the heart of urban neighborhoods, they tend to drop off their occupants on an arterial road at the edge before heading to a peripheral parking facility. This enables further increase in urban density, which again contributes to higher pedestrian activity. In this scenario, policymakers react to the impunity shown by pedestrians with a combination of regulatory changes, physical design, and enforcement. Laws are changed to reduce pedestrian priority, for example, by eliminating unmarked crosswalks at intersections. Physical barriers in the form of fences between the sidewalk and roadway are erected to corral pedestrian traffic along busy streets, marking a return to the mid-20th century street designs that emphasize segregation of road users. So enforcement action against jaywalkers and similar violators is stepped up, and legislation specifies that an autonomous vehicle manufacturer is not liable for any collision where a pedestrian was unlawfully present in the roadway. So in this plan, human drivers remain the dominant method of private transportation. The assumption is that if the costs were similar, travelers would prefer them to a human-driven car, but this may not be the case since autonomous vehicles are slower than a human-driven alternative. And then here are some 2019 statistics from US News. So 57% of respondents familiar with these vehicles would be willing to ride them, and 51% consider them safer. But they also had concerns over it being an issue, as it being a point of unease, and they believe it may lead to a liability in collisions. And the second most prevalent reason is that 53% are worried about cybersecurity, as there could be potential hacking of the vehicles. So these three scenarios may well be precluded by regulation, taxation, or other policy or physical street design changes. And hybrid scenarios are also possible. The point here is that not that one scenario will necessarily prevail, but that the challenges can be analyzed in the strategic interactions of a game theoretic model. Moreover, the impacts of autonomous vehicles will depend not just on technological progress, but also the legal policy and urban planning response. If decision makers wish to capitalize on the potential of autonomous vehicles to create more livable, walkable urban places, one approach would be to promote ambiguity in street design through shared space concepts such as the Wooner Street, which you can see an example of on the right. So designs that basically give pedestrians the confidence and legal priority to enter the roadway become more feasible if many or most vehicles are autonomous. Alternatively, planners could develop a more explicit typology of streets consisting of streets for motor vehicles where pedestrian movement is constrained by physical barriers or greater enforcement, and streets for non-motorized users where cars proceed slowly and yield to pedestrians. Such an explicit division of street function might be necessary to maintain access for both private cars and public transit to the dense urban cores, while maintaining the vitality and appeal of such urban places. So, I guess my last question for the audience would be, what future seems ideal to you? Would you want pedestrian supremacy, regulatory response, or just have human drivers dominate? And that's my presentation. Thank you for watching.